Welcome to WizeUp. I'm Paul Arthur. Got a great topic to talk about today, parental rights as it relates to a lot of the transgender issues that are going on in our school systems across Canada and here in Alberta as well. As most of you know, our premier here in Alberta, Danielle Smith, has introduced some controversial legislation, all right, and that's getting both support and some opposition as well. A couple of great guests today joining me from Calgary to discuss this is Jojo Ruba. He's a Christian apologist and also the organizer of Parents and Kids Together, which not too long ago held a rally at the Alberta Legislature. And their website is parentskidstogether.ca. Also joining us is Faith Groleau. Now, she, as I understand it, is a biological female who identified as a male previously and has since detransitioned. So we'll find out what that means here. I believe she's joining us from Ontario. So good to have you both with us.
Glad to be here, Paul.
Thank you so much for having me.
Oh, you bet, Faith. Looking forward to hearing your story here. Now, maybe we'll start off, first of all, Jojo, with, tell us a bit about this coalition, of different groups here under the banner Parents and Kids Together.
Well, we were talking to some conservative MLAs, and it was interesting. They said, you guys, meaning the Alberta population, Christians, conservative activists, you guys always come to us when we do something wrong and you're upset. But we never, ever see you when we actually do something right. And we really wanted to rectify that. We want to be able to say, no, okay, the legislation that's being passed, Bill 26, 27, and 29 are being proposed, are actually powerful protections for children and biological girls in sports. And these are foundational debates about how we need to create law, how we need to protect kids, how we need to protect parents. And so we need to show up to let the legislators know that this is something Albertans support. And polls actually show that the vast majority of parents in Alberta realize, no, we have a right to protect our kids. The other side has been making all kinds of claims that we hate transgender people, we hate children, we hate anybody who disagrees with us, and that's not true at all.
I do struggle a little bit with the, because I disagree with another viewpoint, that it means I'm intolerant or that I hate somebody. It simply isn't the case, I think, generally speaking.
Right. And frankly, any parent knows that sometimes because you love your child, you have to say no to them. Right? Mm-hmm. That's what love means as a parent, because there's all kinds of issues a child has because of their immaturity that they're not able to understand the consequences of, say, having ice cream for breakfast, right? Something as basic as that. How much more when you're talking about changing fundamental parts of your identity, getting hormone therapy, getting operations, changing in fundamental ways. You don't understand the lifelong consequences there. And at a rally, we had people like Faith Groleau who was speaking at the event to share her story. And that's why I'm so glad you got a chance to invite her to share, because her story is what we're trying to protect kids from.
Yeah, I think we've heard a lot of different stories from people who are in the trans community. Okay, and fair enough, they need to share their stories. And we don't very often hear, at least in mainstream media, the stories of those who are detransitioning. So Faith, I really appreciate your courage to speak out on this particular issue. So can you maybe share a little bit about what it means to be a detransitioner? I mean, maybe, tell us a little bit about how you even got started. I guess, when did you start feeling like you were a male?
Absolutely. So detransitioners, as far as I understand it, as far as it works for me, I was medically transitioned, so I was given puberty blockers and cross-sex hormones, which are the opposite of what I'm biologically born as.
When did that start, by the way? Well, do you know about when that started?
I was about 16 when I socially transitioned, so I just started wearing male clothes. Mm-hmm. And then I was about 17 with the puberty blockers when those started. I was 18 when they started me on the cross-sex hormones, so for me it was testosterone.
Okay. All right.
So that was the transitioning part, and the detransitioner comes from stopping all of those hormones and halting the transitional process completely, and I started letting my body naturally come back to what it was in terms of biological.
How long has that process been? Has it been like years sort of thing, or is it a number of months, or how long does that actually take?
I had stopped medications by the time I was 22. I'm now 25, but I didn't start going back by female pronouns in my name until this past April, I think it was
Hmm.
this past year. I
Okay.
had just found out about different information about doctors not being properly informed about the risks of all of these medications. And I realized that my doctors were
Hmm.
not properly informed, did not inform me. So when I actually personally went and spoke to other
Okay.
trans people, I realized what they're describing as gender dysphoria is not actually what I was dealing with. And so my doctors just let me diagnose myself and affirmed that diagnosis rather than questioning it all. Um,
Wow, that's really interesting. Now,
yeah,
when did this? How old were you when this first started? Were you like a kid, or was this in your teens, or when did
teen,
this start?
teens. So I had always felt like a tomboy. I was always very masculine for a girl, got along with
Mm-hmm.
the boys. That was not a new
Mm-hmm.
thing. I was
Okay.
about 9, I think, when I just kind of in passing said to my mom, "Hey, I think I was supposed to be born a boy." And she just told me that's what a tomboy was. Doesn't mean you're actually a boy. Just, you get along with guys better. You like the guy things. I was like, cool, that works.
Mm-hmm.
When I was about 15, there was a show called I Am Jazz. Jazz Jennings is, as far as I know, still transitioned trans female.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and she was transitioned from a very, very young age, but it was publicized. And so I was able to access it. And I was about 16 when I started to really question and think that that was what I was. And I started actually consulting other people who happened to be trans in the community. And then I started going to doctors by the time I was 16. And then by 17, they started me on the puberty blockers. After a few appointments with one of the physicians, she absolutely thought I was definitely trans, thought that it would be fine if I had these hormones. But going back now, like realizing and actually looking into the history of it, she didn't even do a proper cognitive assessment. She didn't have all of my mental
Oh
health
wow.
records. She didn't know that I had several other mental health diagnoses, or she knew and still let me transition anyway when I should not have, and did not follow the proper procedure for that either.
Well, see that's where I get a bit of a concern, and I don't know if you don't jump in here as well, Jojo. Um, I mean, we kind of have this, you know, a broad paintbrush here that we always want to affirm gender identity no matter what, no matter if the child is, 4 or 5. I mean, how can they make a logical decision on that? It doesn't seem to make sense to me. And then, we get doctors who aren't doing the proper investigation and research saying, hey, are there some underlying mental health issues here, etc.? Are there other, issues around the family, whatever that might be contributing toward this? And then, if I'm understanding correctly, they didn't actually give you the warnings of the potential damage to your body
Right? Yeah,
that these cross hormone blockers or whatever it might be could have on you, right?
Well, if
absolutely.
I could add again, Faith's story is so powerful.
Yeah.
I think your audience needs to hear from her more. But let me just add this. So Kenneth Zucker, who ran one of the
Yes.
world's most successful clinics helping children who with gender dysphoria, he had a success rate of helping children. About 80 to 90% of those children would learn to adopt and accept their biological sex. As Faith said, there are people who don't do that, but at least the clinic provided the psychological foundational care that these children needed to give them that choice. And he shares this story of a 5-year-old boy who wanted to transition. And they spent 2 years counseling with him. And he, by the way, he shared this on the Parliamentary Justice Committee on Conversion Therapy. So you can watch this yourself. And he spent 2 years with this 5-year-old boy. And it turned out the reason why he wanted to be a girl was because when he was 5, his little sister was born with medical conditions that kept the family going back to the hospital. And in his little 5-year-old brain, he thought the only way he
Hmm.
could get the same attention as his sister was to become a girl. And so there's all kinds of stories like that, and Faith is absolutely right. It should be a case by case basis, not this blanket. Every child gets to determine their gender identity, and in some cases, in fact, legally in the law, parents don't even have to know or are kept in the dark. And there's another case here in Calgary where a 13-year-old girl with autism was actually encouraged to become a boy, to live as a boy at school and not tell her parents at home. And the only reason why her parents found out was she tried to commit suicide. It was actually in the
Wow.
Calgary Herald.
Okay.
And we're going to learn more about her. We're going to do a little interview on our ministry and our work here as well. But the point is, the laws that are being proposed by the government will save lives. we'll
Well, oh,
help.
that's interesting. Let me ask you, Faith, on that. Do you feel? I mean, looking back, in your high school years here, if there was I think it's Bill 26. Maybe you can let us know on that, Jojo.
That's the
But
health one,
that's
yes. Yeah.
yeah. I mean, would that have, I guess, stopped this from happening to you potentially?
Absolutely. So what happened with me, I had been seeing a like an actual mental health therapist just for general problems. I had several mental health diagnoses before I was being transitioned. I
Okay.
had been diagnosed with PTSD, depression, anxiety, and dissociative identity disorder. And that all happened when I was 15. By 16, I was seeing a completely different doctor who didn't seem to know any of that. She didn't know I had dissociative identity disorder, didn't know I had alters to talk to. Um, like she really didn't know what she was doing, and she wasn't doing any of the mental health work. Like I personally don't even remember most of my appointments with her because I was not
Wow.
mentally there. And I've only been recently realizing that. I thought I had been diagnosed and prescribed medications all in one visit, but there were several appointments beforehand with her alone that I didn't remember. And then I was
Wow.
diagnosed and I was
Okay.
given the medications. But she wasn't performing the mental health assessments. She was depending on other doctors that I was seeing to do that congruently. And she wasn't following it up at all.
Yeah. I mean, that's just not right. It's not fair to
No.
you. I mean, how? I don't know if you have any idea, of course, how many other people in the trans community, back when you were in that community, are experiencing similar things with their doctors?
I knew of at least one other person who was younger than me going to that same doctor. So far as I know, they're still transitioned. It worked out for them fantastic. But there have been several people who were in the community with me. They got transitioned. Some actually had the double mastectomies done.
Oh, wow.
Some opted for no nipples, and now they're reverting back and saying, "Oh, I'm a woman still. I was wrong." But now they're a woman with no breasts or nipples because the doctors let them make this decision without proper assessments.
That's a
So,
major, major life decision. It's pretty difficult, return back to that. Some people have done that, I understand.
mhm.
Jojo, you want to jump in here at all on some of that, and maybe just briefly on Bill 26? What does that do here in Alberta?
Sure. Yeah. So Bill 26 is about preventing those 15 and younger from having any biological surgery to transition or hormone therapy or puberty blockers. I mean, again, and Faith can talk about this, but we don't even know the consequences of puberty blockers. And Faith, if you could
Hmm.
share that a little later, what puberty blockers did to your body, because there's not enough studies on it, Paul. It's all
Yeah.
stuff that's been being promoted by
Mhm.
doctors and medical professionals who profit from selling this to kids, these ideas to
Yeah.
kids. And ultimately, when I was growing up, we had these commercials on TV that talked about how you need to accept your body for what it is
Right.
and to love your body as itself because it's a beautiful thing, whether you're male or female, whatever, what skin color.
Hmm.
And now we're selling the opposite idea that your all your life's problems will be solved if you just lived as a male or lived as a female. And Faith
Hmm.
is absolutely right that we have to at least, at the bare minimum, do a diagnosis of children to
Oh,
see what
I mean,
other
this
things
I
could
think
be
needs to be written
possible,
into law. Frankly, I think it
which
does.
is what this law does. And
Okay.
so it
Yeah.
also involves parents. So Bill 27 talks about how teachers and others have to involve parents if there's any social transition in public school or in private school. And the parents have to be involved again, because it's actually a fundamental United Nations right, Paul. It's the
Hmm.
Convention on the Rights of the Child actually
Yeah.
says that children have a fundamental right to be protected by their parents. And so
Yeah,
parents,
why would we keep secrets from parents?
right,
I mean, I think to the vast majority of Canadians, that just doesn't make sense. And I've heard this actually from the trans community as well. Parents in that community who aren't against transgender issues. If they want to switch, they say let our kids switch. But if you're going to keep that a secret from me, I got a problem with that as a
exactly.
parent. And so and rightly so. I mean, I don't know. Did your parents know at all, Faith?
Yeah, so my dad was actually not in the picture. He
Okay.
had left when I was about 12. Um, and my mom was extremely religious, and her whole side of the family was very, very religious.
Hmm.
So for me, them saying, no, you're not trans was only because of their relationship with God, whereas the medical community was completely affirming what I was saying. And that made sense to me because that's supposed to be the unbiased, cold, hard truth, factual, scientific evidence. You can't go against it. The problem is they're doing the clinical trials now on us with tax-funded child experimentation,
Yeah, that's
which
kind of
goes
reverse order.
complete. Yeah,
Yeah,
but that's
yeah,
what it
yeah.
is because it's going through the insurance companies. My insurance covered everything. They were covering the medications, they were covering puberty
Wow.
blockers and testosterone. They were also going to cover my top surgery, but they would not cover the masculinization, the plastic surgery side of it. They would only cover the tissue and glandular tissue removal. So
Okay.
that's what a lot of these kids are opting for because that's all they can afford because they're kids. Like I couldn't afford
Wow. Yeah,
$3,000 to get the
of course.
masculinization. I was smart enough at that
Of
time to
course.
realize I can't afford it. I would rather pay for a house. I don't need to rush into it. I'm fine. I'll just let it expire. If I feel like I'm trans later on, I'll just keep on with it. That's fine. But I wasn't in a rush. The doctors were. My insurance was in a rush. And then
Boy.
once I aged out of the system, insurance no longer covered anything.
Yeah,
Once I
boy.
became an adult, my
Okay.
doctors no longer followed up. Insurance was no longer covering anything. And because I was around COVID when I aged out, they ended up running out of the vials. And so I was given a more expensive medication. And so I just couldn't afford
Okay.
to keep up with it. So I just kind of started detransitioning slowly that way. But yeah, I was never
Now,
rushing.
did
The
you,
doctors were.
Faith, did you feel that this transition to male was actually going to give you greater peace of mind and kind of satisfaction with life, purpose in life, that sort of thing? You'd be in a much better place than whatever you were struggling with, right? And if that's the case, how did that work? When did you realize it wasn't working? If that's the case.
So I was sexually abused when I was young. So I never felt comfortable as a girl.
Yeah.
And the fact that I was sexualized before I had developed breasts, the fact that I was then going to get them was just really not appealing to me. And also the fact that my temperament is just very masculine anyway, it really didn't seem that odd to me that I would be a boy. And I found the idea of trans male on my own and brought it to my therapist and my doctors, and they said, yeah, that's absolutely a thing you can do. We'll see and send you to the experts, see if they agree. And I genuinely absolutely thought it was going to be easier. And it
Yeah.
was. I was able to completely mix in with men, and I was fine because I happen to be very androgynous. So if I dress masculine, if my chest is flattened,
Okay.
they can't really tell, and most people didn't have a problem with me. So I integrated very well into society as a man.
When did you
And
notice? I guess that you weren't happy and you were thinking about starting changing back.
I had been happy as a man because I just kind of moved on. Like I never really made that my personality or anything. It was just a piece of the journey for me, so I didn't think anything of it. And then I just started. I had been fortunate enough to work with some wonderful people while I was trans, and they didn't make anything of it. They didn't care. And they were extremely supportive. And so it didn't matter to them what my gender was as long as I did the job right. And I was able to get along with people, whether I was male or female. So that really helped broaden my perspective on it. But then once I was talking with other people who really had this disorder that I was supposed to have, I almost felt like an imposter at that point because I realized I'm taking medications from these people that I shouldn't even be having because I don't have the same mental health problems that they do. And so these people who actually need the drugs aren't getting them because I'm getting them when I don't need them.
So
It's
you
like a
were not.
diabetic and you're giving diabetic medication to somebody who doesn't
Yeah.
have diabetes, right?
So
And
there was
it's
no
just,
need,
yeah,
if I'm understanding correctly, there's no need for you to transition to a male because you were actually just fine in your female body.
yeah.
And so, and I'm guessing you probably, sounds like you had some health issues with these, sex hormone therapy, et cetera, puberty blockers, whatever it was. And so do you want to just share a little bit of that?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So my health issues are a little confusing because I don't entirely know which ones are from the puberty blockers versus my actual like
Okay.
physical health problems.
Right.
But what I am rather sure of is the incontinence is definitely from the puberty blockers. So
Wow.
what puberty blockers do They're actually off-brand castration drugs that we give to sex offenders.
Wow.
Those are used only for children who go through precocious puberty. So if you're like 10 and you start going through puberty before everybody else, they'll give you puberty blockers for a short time, and then they will take you off of them. They will take you off of them. These doctors are basically telling children they can take these puberty blockers, which again, off-brand castration drugs. You can take those long term and there will be no long term effects. It's just a pause button and you can just stop them and everything will go back to normal. This is what we're told. When I went on them, as a woman, I went through menopause. I went through
Oh,
menopause
wow.
around the same time my
Wow.
mother started. She's still going through it. I've been through it twice.
Wow.
Because I
Wow.
went through menopause when I started the puberty
Okay.
blockers. And then as you start testosterone, I ended up taking myself off of them. My doctors, again, did not run that. I said, hey, could I go off of them because
Yeah.
birth control is going to be doing the same thing? And they're like, I don't know. Sure. Let's see what happens.
Wow.
And
Okay.
that was essentially how the whole thing was run. I got to walk in and say, I want this. And they said, okay. So,
Well,
yeah.
that's just concerning. I know there are some concerns apparently around whether or not females will be able to bear children down the road. And again, there's probably more studies needed, et cetera. But that's one of the issues that I'm hearing about as well. So, I don't know. Again, Jojo, if you want to jump in here as well, or Faith, what kind of support or help is being offered to detransitioners by the government, by our medical system? Seems like you're kind of maybe left more on your own.
Yeah.
Well, let me add
Even,
just
oh,
one thing, and then Faith can give her personal experience because obviously, Faith, this is so powerful to share that. But a few years ago, we were fighting what was called the conversion therapy ban when they were trying to ban Christian counseling and others
Yeah.
for people like me who want the counseling, who want the support to reduce unwanted sexual desires or behavior, right? And we're talking about consenting adults.
yeah.
But it still became criminal. And so now I can't get counseling that I choose. But one of the key things that especially targeted was children. And we had people from the gay community, gay doctors, who said, wait a second, when it comes to transitioning children, we need to give them the full breadth of options, including reducing unwanted behavior or unwanted treatment that will help them detransition. And so the good news about the legislation in that Alberta is proposing is it is offering and it is mandating treatment for those who want it around these issues, including after gender transition care. And I would think that in terms of helping people like Faith, she'd be able to access that kind of care that she needs and she wants in her situation under this legislation. Because, and I'll let Faith speak to this, right now, because of this conversion therapy law, there's immense fear by well-meaning
Yeah.
people that they don't want to violate that law. They could go to jail for 5 years.
Wow. I mean, are you getting any chances to speak to your MLAs or even to the premier? Faith, with your situation, I think they need to hear your story, and I'm really glad that there are some media outlets who are beginning to say, "Hey, maybe we should talk to some of these people. Maybe there's something here." So I'm hoping that's going to happen here.
So I actually, around the time, there were some WPATH files that came out in March this past year. And that essentially blew the whole lid off of the doctors knowing what they're doing, realizing that they don't. When I found out that that came out, I actually called Larry Brock myself. And Larry Brock is the representative for Brant, Ontario, which is where I'm from.
Okay.
The day I called him, he said that he got that on his desk that morning. I called him again, maybe a month later. He never got back to me again. There was a journalist I had spoken to who was supposedly in Ottawa at the time who was supposed to be speaking with me. I did actually have a meeting with him, and he never did anything other than that. Never followed up with me. I've had to chase these people. My doctors won't touch me. And that seems to be a
Yeah.
common theme. Anyone who's transitioned
Okay.
and whether they have complications and still want to be trans or whether they realize they're not and they detransition, the surgeon who performs surgeries will not touch them if they're still alive because most of them die.
Okay. Yeah, this is serious stuff. Okay.
Yeah.
Man, man, I got to give you guys both a chance to wrap things up here. I do want to encourage people watching, and I know Jojo and Faith, you want people to contact their MLAs, their MPPs, their members of parliament to voice concerns over this. They need to hear the other side. I believe there are actually a majority of parents who want to see a return to parental rights in this particular issue surrounding transgender issues, right? So any final thoughts here?
Well, let me add, and then I'll give Faith. I'll give you the last word, Faith. We are still wanting the legislation that we've talked about today to pass. We didn't talk about Bill 29, which protects biological girls and gives them the right, recognizes the right that they have to compete with other biological girls. Right? It's not that we want to discriminate against trans people. It's just girls also have a right to have their own sports. Right? And that's called common sense. But with this, the legislation won't be passed until the end of November. So we want every MLA to be contacted by their constituents.
Let's do that. And I got to jump in there. I just got to give Faith about 30 seconds.
Yes. Main thing, detransitioners absolutely exist. The experts don't really know what they're doing because we are still in the midst of clinical trials. So we don't have the evidence. And in the UK, they did actually already ban puberty blockers for anyone under 16. And they have found in their long-term studies that these people who have not had the transition earlier on are actually happier. A lot of these kids just grow through it. And
people need to hear that. I got to cut it off here. I'm so sorry, Faith. We got to talk again. Faith Groleau and Jojo Ruba, parentstogether.ca. Man, this is important stuff. Let's get involved. Thanks for watching. All right. You can watch the whole show at WizeUp.ca or at corcoplus.com. God bless.